So now again is the trainee programming. And by trainees, we really mean the graduate students, postdocs, and other scientists who work directly with Sam, and more broadly, even those he mentored throughout the Department of Radiology and the School of Medicine. And so this year, in fact, we decided to highlight the Stanford junior faculty whom Sam mentored. Their experiences with him, their mentorship, the mentorship relationship with Sam, his friendship, and really how that affected their careers and their work. So I'm, as Dr. Lee mentioned, I'm Bryan Smith. I'm an associate professor of biomedical engineering at Michigan State University, where my lab focuses on really harnessing the power of the immune system by developing new technologies to control and track immune cell fates, essentially in vivo, for inflammatory diseases, including cancer and cardiovascular disease. And so I grew to know Sam very well during my time in the Gambier lab as a postdoc, where I focused mostly on visualizing cell scale interactions with nanotechnology. And I remember very fondly a few years ago when our first speaker, Dr. Parag Mallick, who was before that was one of our collaborators, he was hired as a Stanford faculty in the Canary Center. And Dr. Mallick, after he graduated with his PhD from UCLA, he moved on to a postdoc at the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle. He's now an associate professor of radiology at Stanford, where his lab focuses on translating multi-omic discovery into precision diagnostics. And their lab tightly integrates computational and experimental multi-omic approaches in order to discover processes underlying how cells behave or misbehave and how cancers develop and grow. And so Parag is a man of many talents. He co-founded a proteomics company called Nautilus Biotechnology that's now on the NASDAQ. He also happens to be a professional magician and juggler in his copious spare time. And so Dr. Mallick was, in fact, recruited to Stanford and mentored by Sam. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing him speak about Sam's mentorship and his friendship. Please, Parag. Thank you.
Great.
And if you have any questions for Parag, please feel free to send them in on Slido as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Bryan. It's really a pleasure to be here today and to share a little bit about my experiences working with Sam. And I'd like to start off by just starting off with how I first met Sam. I first met Sam in 2004. I was a first-year faculty member at UCLA and Cedars-Sinai, and Sam was dipping his toes in this brand new program around nanotechnology and cancer. And I'd heard of Sam. He was a legend at UCLA, but I'd never met him before. And our first phone call took place at, I think, 8 o'clock at night on a Friday evening, where he wanted to learn about proteomics and how it could contribute to precision medicine. And that was an area that I was actively involved in. And so we ended up talking that very first time till about midnight. And that was so typical of Sam, is that when he was learning about something, when he was growing, he dove in. And it was the start of an amazing relationship, because that conversation was incredibly wide ranging. We talked about proteomics, we talked about the challenges, we talked about the field, but he also took the time out from that, this incredibly busy, world-changing scientist, to just understand me and to understand what I wanted to do for my career, what I was interested in, and that was the start of a relationship that spanned years and years and years before I was ever even recruited to Stanford. And that nano program, of course, took off, and it was great to be part of seeing that grow. And then in 2011, Sam was creating yet another program at Stanford, the Canary Center for Cancer Early Detection. And Sharon and I were fortunate to be recruited as the first two faculty members in that program. And what I learned from Sam through those experiences, a series of conversations over years and years and years, was really shaped my expectations of mentors. When we think about mentors as a graduate student, you think of this finite period, 5-6 years when you're in the lab. You don't think about all of the opportunities that exist and all the challenges that you have throughout your life. But that's really the key to a great mentor relationship, is that they're with you throughout the entire journey, not just when you're in your thesis trying to get that paper out, but throughout all of the difficult times, throughout all of the career changing moments. And that was something that was so amazing about Sam, is that even though we started the conversation talking about nano and proteomics in 2004, it was 6 years later when he was really pulling together the Canary Center that he was thinking, I'd really love to have an opportunity to work more closely with Parag. Let's make sure he's aware of this opportunity. Let's make sure he's aware of everything that can exist at Stanford and building a community, which was just so amazing. I'd say the other thing that was so valuable that we continue to keep in mind is the role of a mentor as not just an advisor and a counselor, but the role of the mentee-mentee relationship as one that's challenging, where you are constantly challenging each other to think about science in new and different ways, to question assumptions, to question how we can be doing things better, to question how can we be doing things faster, or are we thinking about things in the right way at all? Is this even relevant? Is this ever going to make it to the clinic? Those hard conversations that are the ones that really shaped your thinking. And those are the ones that Sam dove in with gusto, that he was willing to ask those tough questions and to challenge you. And likewise, he appreciated when you asked those tough questions of him. And that parity was so important in the relationship, that it wasn't a one-way relationship. It wasn't just Sam telling you, do this, do that. It was exactly the opposite. It was a mutually respectful relationship where you were heard, where you were supported, where you were questioned, but you were also hearing and supporting and questioning. And so it raises your expectations of what the mentor-mentee relationship should be as a lifelong relationship, one that's focused on how can you create opportunities, creating a bridge of mutual respect. And the other thing that I learned from Sam that I really hadn't appreciated before was the importance of asking for what you need. I think when I was a graduate student, I was honestly kind of afraid of my graduate advisor from time to time, and how much more efficient would I have been if I had said, "Hey, I could really use this. I would be able to go so much faster," or, "Hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help teach me?" And those insecurities, I think, didn't help me at all. And with Sam, you really felt like he was constantly trying to help you. And that the people who thrived the most with Sam were the ones who stopped and took a second and said, hey, Sam, I'm trying to do this. I don't know how to do it. Can we just sit down and talk about what it might take to get there? And having that dialogue, giving him an opportunity, creating space for him to help you, was such an important part of his process, and something that I've really adopted myself now, is making sure that my students know that they can be their authentic selves around me, that they can ask for help, that I will look at them favorably for reaching out and knowing where their boundaries are, rather than looking at them diminutively for not knowing something. And again, building that tremendous culture of respect was so important. So the last point I'll make is really about the broader culture that he fostered. The mentee-mentor relationship is one piece, but ultimately you thrive in part because of your community. And within MIPS and within Canary, having that community around to support each other and help each other grow was so important. And it was a key part of Sam's vision that he not build silos, that he instead build communities. And that meant that you had a set of peers to work with and grow together and thrive. And so really grateful for being part of that, and all the lessons that I learned from him about both how to be a great mentor as well as what it meant to be a great mentor. So I'll stop there and take any questions or hand back to Bryan.
But I know, Parag, you were also you were very close with Sam, particularly as his son got sick. And I wonder if you have any anything that you'd like to share about sort of that experience, with Sam.
Yeah, I mean, that was an incredibly tough time. I think I was one of the first people that Sam called when he first learned of Millen's diagnosis. And I remember the phone call very vividly because he called and he started off the conversation by essentially apologizing for bothering me and interrupting me. I was like, Sam, it's fine. What's going on? And then he shared what he was going through. And Sam, when you looked at Sam, he was always so strong and in control. But in that moment, he was struggling, and it was heartbreaking. The entire situation was heartbreaking, but it was also, when we think about mentorship, it was also an important lesson there. In as a mentor, you don't always have to be that wall. You don't always have to be that brick wall of solidity. That humanity is important, of allowing people in, allowing people to help you, allowing people to support you. And I felt incredibly privileged to be able to help during that time. And really seeing Sam's true humanity. I mean, I remember he was just so candid of, we have to do everything we can. We cannot let him die. And it was so visceral and so honest. For a person who knew more about cancer than anybody else in the world, to have to face this, it was tremendously humbling to him. But you saw the determination in him. You saw that he was going to move heaven and earth, and he did. And it was both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time.
Thank you for that, Parag. I think that offers incredible insight into Sam as a person, and as a mentor, and as a father. All three of the infinite, it seems like, hats that he wore. So thank you. I don't think we have any other questions. So with that, I'm going to next introduce Dr. Natesh Parashurama, who we've already met today, and who overlapped with me for a while we were postdocs in Sam's lab together. Please, Natesh.
Great. Hi, everybody. Talked to you guys earlier today. It's been a pleasure here to listen to these great talks today. My job is to introduce someone who was very impressive to me during my time in the Gambier lab and in the molecular imaging program. I remember meeting our next speaker, Ted Graves, at some of the conferences and retreats, and really enjoyed our conversations and time together. And I didn't get to collaborate with him, but I'll just mention briefly his bio. Ted, originally from, I'll mention briefly in Rochester, New York, and then because I'm familiar with that area, and followed by originally from the Bay Area. Has a great background in terms of academia, and went to Berkeley, bioengineering. He went to UCSF for his PhD in magnetic resonance imaging. MR spectroscopy as well. And then he did a postdoc at Mass General, where it literally was part of inventing some new imaging modalities, fluorescence molecular tomography. And I do remember his optics lecture that I took when I was a postdoc there at Gambier Lab. And since then, Ted has been focused on imaging and radiobiology, kind of this whole field of radiotherapy, and taking several different angles. I will let him talk more about his personal experiences and research and experiences with Sam.
Great. Thank you very much, Natesh. And thanks to everyone, for all the organizers, Bryan, Natesh, everyone else, for allowing me to speak today. Let me get my slides up. I just have a few images to show you guys. Hopefully, is that showing my slides? Does that look good?
Not yet, but I forgot the joke I was going to make that we're going to hear a TED Talk today.
Yes. I would almost pulled up the slide of Sam in front of the TED Talk logo to put. How about now? It says I'm screen sharing now. Everybody?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. I again thank the organizers for this opportunity. I'll tell you a little about my history with Sam and what I think, what I valued in our mentorship relationship. Parag spoke very eloquently and beautifully about that relationship and Sam's unique qualities there. Many of you have probably seen this mosaic, and I wanted to first off give props to my colleague Sandeep Biswal. He and I decided to make this mosaic when it was when Sam was ill, and we wanted to do something to show how many lives he touched and how many people he'd influenced. And so we combined Sandeep's reservoir of photos with some code that I'd written to make a photo mosaic, and this has kind of taken on a life of its own. We gave Sam a big printed copy of this let's see. I'm afraid it was about 4 or 5 months before he passed away. Aruna told us that he liked to kind of scan through the tiles and reminisce, and that's something I find myself doing. I have a copy of this in my office. My story of meeting Sam is actually a little bit similar to Parag's. This is a photo from a few years after I met him, but I was a postdoc in Boston with Ralph Weissletter, and I presented at a meeting, and Sam chaired the session that I was in. That was where I first met him, and I remember him asking me a couple of very, very probing questions during the Q&A after my talk on fluorescence tomography. A few months after that, I had applied for a faculty position at Stanford. And one of the things that swung my thinking about where to go was that I had heard that they were recruiting Sam into radiology. And so I sent him an email. I had literally only talked to him at the SMI meeting. I sent him an email and said, I'm thinking about going to Stanford and taking this position in radiation oncology. I hear that you're going. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. I believe, he wrote me back within, as was typical of Sam, within just a few minutes and said, yes, we need to talk on the phone. He called me very soon after that and started telling me about this molecular imaging program that he was going to create and all the things that he wanted to do. As is typical of Sam, had a very expansive vision for what he wanted to accomplish right from the outset. But one thing that really stuck with me, again, I met Sam once for 5 minutes. And he was telling me what a central role he wanted me to play in this and in its development and whatnot. And that was, to a postdoc who was very clumsily designing his figuring out how he was going to transition to being faculty. This was, huge to my morale and really made me think, wow, this is the place I want to be and want to work with this person and play a role in this really beautiful vision that he's put together. So this was in 2003. This is a photo from a few years later. You see me sitting at the end of the table here. This is a Gambier Lab lunch at the AMI meeting in Orlando that Sam was kind enough to welcome me to, along with a few members of my lab and a few other people that you'll recognize some familiar faces from around the table. So this is, I think, emblematic of Sam's approach that I will talk a little bit more about in a minute of integrating people and welcoming people. So, one of the things I think is specific to me, and Parag touched on this, was the junior faculty culture that Sam created. When he created MIPS, one of his initial things that he did was to start recruiting junior faculty, and as part of that, to put together a regular junior faculty meeting. I think it was every 2 weeks. Interestingly, this was a radiology specific endeavor, but he was happy to go. I remember him specifically going to Gary Glazer, then chair of radiology, and saying, I'd like to include Ted Graves, who's not technically part of radiology. I'm in radiation oncology. include him as part of this. And so again, I felt very honored for him to go to bat for me for this. This was a great group, getting us all together, building a culture of people so that we could all understand, we had a forum to address these growing pains of becoming an academic, but also to understand that we're not the only one that is having trouble getting papers published or getting grants funded. So I think the culmination of this, and this is something I think me and a lot of my colleagues from this era really look back and cherish, was we had a retreat for this group in 2008 where Sam rented a couple of houses down in Carmel, down near Monterey, California, on the coast. And we spent 3 days there. Sam took 3 days out of his schedule to go down to this retreat where it was this group here. This is, I think, at our final dinner that we had there. But we were living in these houses. We would cook. We would get up, have breakfast, and we would just sit and talk about, what are the challenges facing us, and what environment do we want to build at Stanford as part of this. So, a lot of these kind of casual chats, a lot of just hanging around the house, going for walks on the beach. I look back at this as just a seminal moment for me in establishing myself as faculty and building this community that Parag described at Stanford. Just really hugely valuable. And again, you'll see a lot of familiar faces here, a lot of people that have gone on to fantastic careers, including our moderator, one of our organizers today, Joe Wu, over here on the right. So just a fantastic experience and a really great example of the culture that Sam implemented at Stanford. So one of the things, when I try and look at, what was Sam's philosophy? What did he do so fantastically well that, I would like to, implement in my own career? One of the things I always come back to is that, he's clearly an idea guy, and we've heard this over and over again. He's came up with these fantastic ideas, was always thinking down the road about how do we transform the field and really move it ahead in radical steps. And so providing this high level vision, that's certainly part of it. But then in addition to that, it's creating this environment where people can then take charge and help implement this vision, take ownership of it, and move it forward. So this is a photo from a retreat at Asilomar. All these photos were taken by Sandeep, by the way. I need to give him due credit. He's played a long time valuable role as a departmental photographer. But this was Sam talking about just professional skills and qualities, and you see this list here on the slide of things that I think give rise to this environment that he created, and it's not all just coming in and being the master of your scientific domain, but it's about interacting with other people. It's about balancing work with your personal life, with getting exercise, with your health, for example. I remember Sam letting my colleague Fred Chin and I go use his health club up in Portola Valley because we were concerned that we weren't getting out and getting enough exercise. So we went swimming there a few times. But this, building this environment where people can make a positive contribution and play a part in this bigger vision, I think was a really important component of the environment that Sam created. And the other thing, which I think, again, we've heard repeatedly through this meeting, was Sam's ability to bridge different disciplines. And this is really one of the central kind of tenets that I've kind of seized onto, is building multidisciplinary teams and generating multidisciplinary expertise. So this is a photo from a retreat that we had for MIPS in 2010, the group photo. And I can tell you in this audience, I mean, the range of skills is just phenomenal. And that's true of molecular imaging in general, but this brings up this question of how do you get these people to interact in a positive way, and as Parag put it, not silo themselves into, well, I'm a chemist and I'm an engineer, I'm a biologist. So getting an environment where people can interact and synergize in that way, it's certainly easier said than done, but it's hugely important and it has huge payoff down the road. I think in the video that Gary Gold showed this morning, there was a quote from Sam in which he said, you can learn anything you need. And I've kind of adopted that, I don't want to go to a seminar where a chemist is speaking and say, well, I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to pay attention to this, but really try and get into, what are they saying? How does this relate to what I'm doing? And how can we potentially collaborate on this? So I think this is something that is really important, and again, easier said than done, but has a huge upside in terms of the culture that it can create and the rewards it can bring. Also, I wanted to highlight, Carolyn mentioned the CPRIT study section that she served on with Sam way back when. I was also on that section, as was Parag. And that was, again, another really great example of, all the different types of people coming together and interacting. Those were fantastic experiences, and another real positive that I am hugely grateful to Sam for including me in. So the last thing, this is my last slide. The last thing I wanted to point out is something I look at as a real kind of tangible and ongoing example of Sam's legacy. And that is this graduate program that we've just created called Biomedical Physics at Stanford. It's something that Sam had spoken about for years and years. And really the way this evolved was, it was something we kept coming back to and thinking, we would love to do this. How do we overcome all the infrastructural hurdles to do this? And in 2018, we decided to convene, with Sam's blessing, a working group to kind of work through all the issues and come up with a plan. And I remember very clearly, I think it was in trying to remember the exact year, either 2019 or 2020, coming to one of these meetings and hearing from my colleagues in radiology that Sam had just decided to endow $500,000 a year to make this program a reality. And this was, again, an example of Sam, really putting weight behind these mentorship ideals that he believed in. And I'm happy to announce that now, after going through all the review from the university, a delay induced by the pandemic, we've just finished admissions for our first class of students that are coming into this program. This is a program sponsored by my department, Radiation Oncology, as well as Radiology. So it's again a multidisciplinary effort, and it's something that I like to look at as a kind of a living embodiment of the mentorship ideal that Sam put forth. So just the last thing I'll say, I think, while Parag was talking, it struck me a little bit. He described Sam's mentorship approach as not as a finite relationship, but one that was ongoing and continual and evolving. And interestingly, that's something, I think I potentially thought about this relationship as, Sam will help me out in the early years and gradually we'll drift apart and we'll just go on our separate ways. And interestingly, unfortunately, since Sam passed away, I find myself thinking about him more and more all the time, and all the things that he did that I found, inspirational and valuable and supportive of my career. And so I think that's a great description that Parag put out about how this is a continuing relationship and something that can go on even before he was unfortunately taken from us. So with that, I will stop and happy to take any questions, and thank everyone for their time.
Thank you, Ted. Excellent review of your background with Sam and all the amazing things he did for us. Any questions? So, Ted, you mentioned that first call. You said you had a job offer, and then you called Sam, and he said we have to talk. But I don't remember if you said the details of was there anything interesting from that conversation you remember, or?
Well, it's funny for me to look back on it now, just because, I remember him bringing up MIPS and the program that he was going to create in radiology. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, this is really impressive, all the details that he's getting into. And it's not, it's basically in retrospect now that I can look back and say, wow, he had all he had all this mapped out, all the things that we've accomplished now. He was thinking about this in 2003 before he ever, officially set foot on the Stanford campus. So that amount of foresight, we all know Sam was a force of nature in many ways. It just boggles my mind that he, all the ideas that he had up front, that a lot of those came to fruition. Probably the majority of those came to fruition in some form or another. So I remember all of that. I remember a lot of those early. I wish I had photos of these. I couldn't dig any up, but of those initial faculty meetings, and it really, the memories of those early days, it comes back to that core of faculty, Sam, Chris Contag, all the junior faculty that were recruited, building this, this group where we were all, not just professionally had a professional relationship, but we all, I think in many ways, I value many of these people as close friends of mine now, that he built this very tight-knit group, and you can see kind of the fruits of that and all the things that are part of Sam's legacy.
Great. It's amazing that he had all this mapped out, and he probably had it even more mapped out for the future.
Yeah.
So we will conclude our talks today. Great talks by both Parag and Ted. We thank them for their time and energy. I'm going to introduce back to Bryan. I'll just mention for everyone, for the audience, we put together a video of some of Sam's talks last year. We're going to try to play them during lunchtime. So look out for keeping your computer on and live stream going during lunch. While you eat, you can enjoy some of the videos we produced last year, compilation of Sam's videos. And I'll turn it over to Bryan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natesh. So I'm just going to close this session by discussing the trainees of Sam Gambier had kind of our own little mini symposium. We had a wonderful time reminiscing about Sam and really discussing science yesterday. And I'm honored and privileged to just briefly share a little bit about that day with you. One of the biggest goals that I had heard Sam express was that he wanted to seed, MIPS trained, Stanford trained molecular imaging faculty and centers throughout the country and really the world. He was always forward thinking. He was an incredible strategist. And he recognized that in order to really build out his vision of how precision health and how medicine should look and achieve his key goals in medicine, he would need, his colleagues and his former trainees to really buy in and be on board with that vision at institutions and industry throughout the world. And in that context, I think Sam would have been really quite pleased with our mini symposium. It was we kind of joked, it was kind of a multi-generational lab meeting in a sense. We found new potential collaborations with each other for our emerging and some of which were established labs throughout the world. And we pushed each other on our science with a familiar jargon and sort of an ease that, it really can be hard to find once you leave that little cocoon of Sam's lab. And so during our symposium, we heard science and anecdotes from ex-trainees, colleagues in academia, in industry, and we were also joined by Aruna Gambier. And we were, as a group, we were reminded how fortunate we were to have gotten the opportunity to really learn from and work directly with Sam, both scientifically and to observe his lab management and his departmental management capabilities. And indeed, as Parag and Ted both mentioned, that mentorship didn't end when we left the lab. It only continued. And, even to this day, when something great happens, I kind of the first thing I want to do is to tell somebody. And the first person I usually want to tell is Sam. And so we remembered also that Sam believed in us more than we believed in ourselves. And that had the effect of, that his trust and his belief really enabled us to achieve much beyond what we had, even ourselves had ever thought was possible. So with that, I like to allow us to go to the lunch break. Just reiterate what Natesh said. In a minute, we should have Sam's outstanding talks. We essentially last year, the committee put together a compilation of some of Sam's most outstanding pieces of his talks that we found. And we hope you'll enjoy that while you eat your lunch. So thank you so much.
Also wanted to thank Katie and Ashley for helping us out organizing this session and also our mentee session. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.